So guys, a new dungeon just came out if you hadn't heard or had your feed blown up by weapon tests and spoilers and secrets. It's pretty cool. Let's talk about it before your attention span dies. For starters, let's take a look at the mechanics of the first encounter. It kicks off with a little dial telling you a riddle that you need to solve. Once you figure out what the missing pieces in the later rounds, is, you peruse the 4 rooms to find the correct symbol, then use the lenses dropped by the subjugators that spawn in each room to coax the beam of light into striking the dial. Briefly touching on contest mode, I wanted to say that the imposed timer wasn't nearly as bad as Vesper's host's contest mode timer for first encounter. It definitely kept an extra edge on the encounter and induced some mild stress, but it wasn't so bad that we finished on 0 seconds like we did on Vesper. The subjugators themselves aren't that hard of a target to kill, but they can be annoying if given enough time to perform their special attacks. The real issue in my opinion is the little attendants that are cleverly chosen to mash as annoyingly as possible with their subjugator. The stasis guys are paired with the strand subjugator, so they'll slow you with a dusk field and then the big guy will suspend you. Vice versa, the strand guys are paired with the big stasis guy who does the ice crystal attack where it'll freeze the whole room and shatter it for massive damage to you, but you can't escape because the little green goblins keep sucking you into it until boom, clap, the sound of my guardian shattering. The annoying enemies don't stop there though, with the husks being possibly the worst enemy type to ever be considered for a role in not just this encounter but any encounter. While on contest, the husks would group up and kill us via being little gremlins or showing us their worms, that we, mostly just me, started calling them the Huz because they couldn't get off me. I know Dado touched on how infuriating the ads were in his video, but I also wanted to touch on it just to drive the point home that the Huz don't mess around. At least I didn't on contest. On normal mode it's a lot more bearable. The rest of the encounter isn't though. Without the timer from contest, the first encounter gets really boring really quick, and you can see that it's really just an incredibly repetitive encounter that's easy to zone out on. At the time of writing this portion of the video, I haven't attempted a solo run yet, but I can very easily see this encounter becoming a pain point or frustration during solo, or, God forbid, solo flawless clears. I did want to mention that I vibe with the aesthetics of not just this encounter, but the dungeon on a whole. I love the pyramid aesthetic, and I'm glad Bungie didn't leave it to rot with Valve the Disciple. Overall though, this encounter gets like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 4 out of 10, and places just above Ghost of the Deep first encounter for me, although it is really hard to score underneath that. After progressing through the jumping section, I'll touch on those later, you'll find yourself in the second encounter. I know there was some discourse on the mechanics online, but I simply got around that by not getting online during the race. I'll explain the encounter how I do it as simply as possible. Start the encounter, read the far right clock to see how many ticks the clock is away from stop. If it's 1 or 2, then wait for the wizards to spawn and collect their nodes, then deposit the correct amount into the clock. If it's 3 ticks away, either ignore it or see if you can set the clock to commune with 1 or 2 nodes. After the 4th clock is set, leave it alone and wait for the bar at the top of the screen to pass its 3rd quarter. After this, check and see how many ticks the 3rd clock is away from stop. At this point, go for a stop even if it's 3 away, as the wizards will be coming in more frequently. Repeat this process for clock number 2 and then place clock number 1 on kill as soon as possible, then damage the boss. I could explain more in depth, but that would be boring, so we move on. Hey, this is editing me here. Just wanted to say that since I wrote this, my strat has changed. I literally just full send kill on the first wheel every single time now. But yeah, you can do this however you want. My impressions of the boss itself are very good. I like this encounter a lot. One of the coolest things about this encounter is how damage works. If you wanted to take it slow and go for a more chill damage route, you can hardcore focus one of the eyes with a linear or something, or you can be rewarded for trying more unique and out of the ordinary damage strategies due to how this boss's health functions. Because each of the 4 bosses is technically a separate instance, you can have damage going on multiple eyes and it'll all count towards the total boss bar. I think this is a genius way to calm complaints about encounters being too hard or too easy by raising the skill ceiling but also keeping the skill floor pretty low. Even as I'm writing this video, I keep seeing new ways to do damage to this guy that are so unconventional and out of the ordinary. The ad selection isn't nearly as downright devious as the first encounter, but they can still swarm you if you aren't on top of your game. Throughout the encounter, various groups of dread will spawn with the Yankee Strand guys and the Grims. Thankfully, the Huz don't make a reappearance during this fight. As part of the mechanic, various groups of Hive will spawn in depending on your inputs to the wheel. Ogres, Knights, and Wizards oh my. On contest, the Ogres were problematic if comms weren't locked in, but on normal, as long as you're paying attention, you'll be fine. The Wizards can be annoying if you don't take care of them as soon as possible and just let them build up, because they will focus fire you in an area that you thought was covered. As for replayability, this varies a lot depending on how much you enjoyed the encounter. But for me, I can see myself spending a lot of time here. This encounter has so many variables going on that almost every run is unique in its own way, and that makes replayability golden. If I'm being honest, I wasn't even tired of this encounter during contest, and I was stuck there for what seemed like days. Plus encounter, definitely one of my favorites. Pressing on through the dungeon, you'll get to the penultimate encounter in the form of Kevin the Erased. The encounter works by having a dial in the middle of the room that you read and then decide on which side is a truth or a lie. From there, you move throughout the encounter to turn off all the dials with truth symbols that are glowing and turn on all the dials with lie symbols that aren't glowing. Once this has happened, run back up to the clock in the middle of the room and activate the little thingamabob to start the fight. After activation, hide behind something that casts a shadow and remain there until the boss's shield burns off, then start damage, rinse, repeat. As for the boss itself, there are things I like and things I don't. My favorite thing about this guy is how he acts during pre-damage. I love that he just feels like an actual frontline enemy, constantly trying to mess you up while in the main area. I also appreciate that he can't follow you into the rooms with the subjugators. His attacks will keep you on your toes while trying to do the mechanic. With his upgraded version of a Weaver's pull attack and then a suspending stop, can be very life-threatening depending on location and how many adds are up. He will also shoot out little threadlings, which can be minorly annoying, but not nearly as bad as his other two moves. Real issue arrives with his damage phase. As of this video, the optimal DPS strat is 2 Queen Breakers and a div for trio, 1 div, 1 Queen Breaker for duo, and 1 Queen Breaker for solo. This is a seemingly pretty bland and basic setup. And it is. The issue just arises from how Kevin acts during a DPS phase. He'll run behind cover for extended periods of time so you lose out on linear damage, or he'll run right at you to disrupt damage, or he'll use his stupid pull attack to get you out of the well and into danger. Bonus points if he does this as damage is ending so you get cooked alive. Then he'll stomp to suspend you and decrease damage. I'm not a hater of bosses that move around and are up close and personal with you. I just dislike that the best way to deal with this boss, who loves getting up close and personal, is via long-range crit-based weaponry. As for the selection of minors and majors thrown into this encounter, I must say it's pretty well done. The perfect blend of aggravating and annoying with plain and simple. I believe there are 6 different types of enemies excluding the boss: Thrall, Acolyte, Knights, Husks, Attendants, and Subjugators. If you want to count enemy threadlings, then there are 7 enemy types in this encounter. Personally, I love the diversity in enemy types as it makes the encounter seem richer in depth and gives you multiple things to look out for and pay attention to. The replayability for this encounter is still pretty solid. Because of how the mechanic works, you're never really doing the exact same thing 2 runs in a row. There's always something slightly different or off about the lie wheel. My only issue with this encounter is damage, as Kevin is just so hard to get to behave sometimes that it could mess your team up and tack on an extra damage phase or 2, which can certainly get annoying on repeat clears. Okay, on to the real meat of the dungeon. Let's talk about the jumping puzzles and in-between areas. These were really cool. I enjoyed them a lot more than Vesper's Hosts. 0 to 1 was a normal 0 to run, nothing crazy or out of the ordinary, lots of things to run past and a couple tucked away paths to find, some good opportunities for movement tech. 1 to 2 is where things heat up, where right after you beat first encounter you get dropped into a maze, where you can find a secret chest or just run right through it. Then you get to a big open area that spawns Grims and Attendants and such. Then you get to the ball run, which looks like that one place in Elden Ring. After you get to a section that sort of teaches a mechanic for second encounter, which is unfortunately my least favorite part of 1 to 2 because of how long the wizards take to spawn in, plus you can get bad RNG with a double 3 dunk needed. 2 to 3 is abysmal, I think. There are some fun parts that show the pyramid aesthetic, then there is the stupid lens puzzle, which even though I've memorized it with the optimal path, still takes a century and a half. After that though, it's fine and dandy, minus the absurdly long res timer of course, but that's become a staple in recent years. The solo experience of this dungeon is mostly dictated by the class you choose to play on, as it is every season really. This season, the go-to class for solo or solo flaws is Titan, so that's aside the point. Personally, I think this is a fairly easy solo compared to its counterpart in the Final Shape Dungeon Key. The only real issue is how much health Kevin has for a solo, but at least the mechanics to get to damage aren't bad at all, so it goes by fast. There's no if you fail you wipe mechanic, so everything in the dungeon can be done at your own pace, whether that takes 40 minutes or 5 hours. Now, let's talk about loot, the part that most people would even consider doing this activity for. This dungeon has 4 legendaries and 1 exotic, just like all other dungeons since dungeons got their own loot pool. If I'm being honest, these weapons are all kinda mid in the PvE sandbox. Like, they aren't insane must-have weapons compared to the Vesper's Host loot pool. Let's start with the Scout Rifle, Unworthy. It has some cool rolls like Firefly in the first column and the new Bolt Charge perk in second, maybe a Rapid Hit Precision Instrument roll for something. You have to keep in mind that this is a Scout Rifle, and Scout Rifles just aren't that good in the current sandbox. Next on my list is the Hand Cannon, which I believe is called Unloved. It's a Strand 2 burst. It can get Dragonfly in the first column and Tear in the second column for maybe an interesting roll, Or you could rock Dragonfly Frenzy or Kill Clip for an extra damage bonus. This can also roll with that new damage perk Elemental Honing, but I don't think you want to do a bait and switch-esque swap for a damage increase to your hand cannon. The shotgun seems spec'd mostly for damage, with perks like 4th Times and Sympathetic Arsenal in the 3rd column, and perks like Bait and Switch and Elemental Honing in the 4th column. I guess it could be good for damage, but like, we aren't in a slug meta right now. Maybe if slugs come back in the future, this will be good, so might as well pick it up. This weapon also gets Ad Clear perks, making it the second Void Slug shotgun that can be spec'd for Ad Clear. And it's worse than the other one. Well, not really. They both do something slightly different. Nessa's Oblation gives Overshield when you Ad Clear with it, and this one weakens enemies. So it's just a question of, do you want to play offense or defense? By the way, no one is asking that question because no one is using a Slug shotgun as an Ad Clear weapon. Saving what I think is the best for last, we have the Trace Rifle Unsworn. The reason I think it's good is because it can roll with the brand new perk Detonator Beam, which reads, dealing sustained damage creates an explosion around the target. That seems pretty solid if I do say so myself. And since Detonator Beam rolls in the 4th column, it can be paired with a variety of reload perks, although the one most people will seek out is Rewind Rounds. To my Cenotaph Warlocks, you can switch out Rewind Rounds for Shoot to Loot, as that will be a lot more useful than Rewind Rounds when your helmet already carries the weight of reloading for you. I haven't seen this happen yet because I still don't have a good roll on this thing, but I'm pretty sure the Detonator Beam explosion will pick up nearby orbs and ammo if you have Shoot to Loot. Before I talk about the exotic, I do want to mention the Origin trait because it's kinda crazy. It adapts to targets depending on if they are minor or major. If they are minor enemies, shots explode, and if they are strong targets, majors, shots will exhaust the target. From what I've heard, this is insane, and I can't wait to get my hands on some of these weapons with good rolls to test them out. On to Finality's Augur. This weapon is another super interesting exotic that Bungie has cooked up. Personally, I think it's about the same tier of weapon as Anarchy or Dragon's Breath, something passive you shoot out and then do damage with something else. The Catalyst all but confirms this playstyle, granting the weapon Bait and Switch. The weapon works by having an alt fire mode that you use to launch out a turret that rains fire from above. Once a turret is out, you can mark targets or areas to focus the fire of the turret and increase the damage output of the turret. After the target is marked, you're free to swap between your other weapons for a damage rotation. I really like this exotic because it feels like a new playstyle they're implementing, making exotics that you have to learn to use to maximize their potential. They've been making more and more weapons like that recently, to the point where all 3 exotic weapons that have come out this season are built like this, to have their own unique playstyle and skill ceiling. That is my full review of the Sundered Doctrine dungeon. Overall, it's a really enjoyable dungeon that I can see myself spending a lot of time in, going for a good solo flawless run, helping people through their first clear, teaching the encounters, farming for loot, and doing stupid challenges in. 9 out of 10 dungeon for sure. Maybe even 10 out of 10 if Bit of Heresy didn't exist. Thank you everyone who made it this far. I have no idea how long this video ended up being, but I'm imagining it's not 5 minutes. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, share, like, comment. I know this video is out of place on my channel, so I'm not expecting it to do well, but if the algorithm boosts it, who knows? Again, thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you in the next video.